Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind, UK, the reunion. Let's watch.
Kids who treat people based on how you treat them, not their job title, not the car they drive, not the house they live in, how they make you feel.
Yeah.
So I'm always going to choose to raise my kids this way.
Do you think that maybe given more time, you could have had more chats about values and maybe understood each other a bit more?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I believe I said something along those lines, that the things that they were saying as to why they were not getting married didn't sound like the sort of things that people would typically hold up as that much of an overriding priority over love, right? So I suspected that there were either other reasons and or just they weren't really compatible. One person just wasn't feeling it. What do you say in a situation like this? And maybe strategically it's a better idea not to say something, or you just don't even know because you're in the whirlwind from the time in the pods through Corfu to, the wedding. It's a whirlwind. But I find that people have a really hard time saying or accepting or hearing from other people that the reason why they're breaking up is a sort of an amorphous feeling that they just don't want to be in the relationship anymore. People will grab reasons, and sometimes there are very compelling reasons. But like when we think about Stephen and Sabrina, I'm going to take a guess and say that for whatever reason at some point, and maybe you could track it in terms of, the distance and this sort of thing, or when she put her walls up. Love is a very complicated thing. We have a very hard time manufacturing it. I mean, we can't manufacture it, but we have a hard time attaining it, and we don't have any formula to get it, and therefore we don't have a formula as to why it goes away. And what I find when I talk to people, and the sort of style of therapy that I use incorporates a lot of what we call phenomenological listening, where in a nutshell, there's actually volumes of books that describe the philosophy and the practice and the mindset and everything. But in a nutshell, it is a style of listening and asking questions and responding in which you're trying to get at the essence of what the other person's experience is. As someone as a client is telling me about their day or about a past relationship or a trauma or something, if I don't watch myself, I can filter everything that they're saying through my filter. I might even hear only a couple sentences and assume I understand the whole book. But through phenomenological listening and practice, it's almost like a mindfulness practice where you have to, as certain interpretations and stories start to emerge in your mind, they call bracket it, or you put it up on the bookshelf, and then you get back to really listening. And what I have found is that when I phenomenologically listen to people as they are breaking up or after breaking up, from their choice, they're the one that is deciding to leave. And this is my interpretation of what they're telling me in terms of their experience, is that for whatever reason, this feeling just started to grow, or a feeling started to fade, whichever half empty, half full you want to say it. And you can point to certain identifying markers like, I found myself really enjoying it when they left town, or I found myself thinking about a former partner, or I found myself just not wanting to talk to them. Like a big event happened in my life, and instead of calling them, I called like these other people, and that was kind of interesting. Or we had this big fight, and at a certain point, I just thought, I don't even want to work on things. In the past, I would, after a fight, I'd be like, we got to fix this. But at a certain point, something broke in me, and I just said, I don't even care if we talk about this ever again. In fact, I don't even think I care that we had a fight. That was awful, but I just want to move on. I'll be cordial to the person and let's just forge ahead because I'm done with this. Now, one way of looking at it is like the conflict destroyed the relationship or snuffed out the flame, and certainly that can be a narrative. But other couples will have the same amount of conflict or more, and they retain that loving feeling somehow, and it keeps them going down the road. It keeps them motivated. It kind of sounds like Stephen and Sabrina didn't have that much, maybe particularly for Stephen. There wasn't enough there. It also kind of sounded like he was alluding to depression and anxiety, which can cloud things or can make his behavior come across to Sabrina as purposely hurtful, and if she became more upset, he would get more anxious or more depressed or whatever. I don't know. He wasn't saying that directly. But so for Tom and Maria, I'm guessing that whatever spark or love that they had from the pods, which there's no reason to believe they didn't have what everyone else has, during the Corfu trip, or at least when they came back to the UK, that it just started to go out for whatever reason, and then you start looking for reasons, and then that's what you say are those reasons. And sometimes that's better, right? Because it can salvage other people's feelings, right? It's like, well, our values are different. And then the other person could be like, oh, okay, yeah. But if you say, I don't know, there was a week of time where I just found myself less and less attracted to you, or less and less interested in hearing you tell your stories, or less and less interested in interacting with you. That could be more hurtful, even though it might be more accurate. But when it comes to phenomenological listening, but also just phenomenological mindset, is that all of the narratives I'm saying right now are just mine, and it's not the truth. It's not the objective truth. So I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Tell me your phenomenological experience. What is it? What's your experience like?
I've got to say, like, having watched the episodes back, there were a couple of moments in that which I kind of looked at and thought, wow, that was like, it was ugly behavior from me.
Okay, I'm glad he's saying that, because, in terms of the scale of ugly behavior, we all experience Shake and Shane and others. So I wouldn't say that Tom is even in that category. In fact, I'm guessing that if Tom was on other seasons in the United States, those scenes wouldn't have even been included, because they weren't the top 50 dramatic moments. I think they included those scenes of Tom's because they just didn't really have much else to show. Anyway, so I'm glad he's saying that, because it was ugly. And I thought that I heard him say at the altar that he had learned some things about his, I don't know if he would call it classism. I don't even know if it is classism, but it's good that he's recognizing that. And it would be quite a trip, right? I imagine everyone on the show, when they watch the footage back, even the Amy's and the Johnnies of Love is Blind, I'm guessing have that experience too. Like, oh, is that what I look like? Or is that the tone of voice? I've talked about this before, that there are two contexts that I've experienced this myself. One is as a therapist, we will videotape ourselves as a matter of training, and also as a matter for our supervisors to see, because we don't necessarily need the supervisor to be in the room, because that would make the client uncomfortable, but we need to film. And also just as a matter of course for my own personal development as a therapist, I will film myself and watch it back sometimes. And there are times I cringe at it every time. Like, that's what my face looks like when I'm listening. Now, I'm guessing I'm overly critical because my clients don't seem to complain about it, but it does help, if I am really trying to come across, I'm at least I'm thinking as I'm watching the video, I'm like, well, if I was a client, that wouldn't, there's a better way to do that. And so because you never know how you're coming across, and so you videotape yourself. The other context is if you will record yourself having a tense or even a conflictual conversation with your spouse, with permission, of course. And when you listen back to it, and I've had this experience where in the moment, I think I'm coming across with a very level tone, very reasonable words. And I listen back and I'm like, oh my God, what was that? That is harsh or wrong tone or the wrong words. That's not what I remember. So you imagine watching this. For him, he is given this chance. And it's kind of weird because until someone really tells you, or you actually watch yourself, sometimes it's almost impossible to even begin to ask those questions of yourself. But it sounds like he's asking those questions, which is great. I mean, he didn't come out of the womb with classism. He was programmed, and now he is trying to deprogram, I hope.
That was something which I've had some real time to reflect on.
During your vows, Maria, you thanked Tom for showing you a different version of strength. Like, what did you mean by that then?
I still stand by that when it comes to Tom. He was very emotional, and he did definitely show, that there's nothing wrong with being an emotional person. It's okay to show that side to the world as well.
Huh. Okay. Well, that's good to hear. And it sounds like they aren't angry severely at each other. So she's able to recognize that and admit it or say it. And, okay.
You know, the way that I was raised by my mum. Like, I've never really had kind of like a masculine role model in my life. So that comes with a lot of negatives, which I think actually came out a lot in our relationship. But, you know, maybe some positives as well. My main kind of outtake from this whole...
Oh, yeah. Are we going to hear about Tosh? So Tosh is sitting next to, I can't remember her name. What was her name? Started with an SH, I think. Charlotte. But if they're sitting next to each other, does that mean they're both dating one of the dudes on the stage?
Because of his comment afterwards about, I want to raise strong, independent daughters, it just made my blood boil. You met her children, you see the type of women we are, and so it just made me mad to see how sweet she was and how welcoming she was to him to then still go on and indirectly insult the women in my life.
Yeah. There's a different way he could have put it. It's still a thing, though, that I think is reasonable for him to think, maybe not that far, that was assuming some things. And often after someone says no at the altar, they tend to be more harsh because, you know, it's a whirlwind and they feel bad. So they're trying to grab onto some reasons like, it was the right thing I did, right? This wasn't like a bad choice. So he might have been doing some of that. And I'm guessing he'll apologize, I think. But he's completely reasonable. He shouldn't have, well, yeah, it's reasonable for him on the inside, without vocalizing it to the cameras, to think, well, one, we have very different ideas, or I've seen the tip of the iceberg, I think, in terms of different ideas about gender and about roles. And that is a concern of mine. As I said back then, I don't think that would be the main reason as to why he would not want to marry her, having previously been in love with her. I think it was kind of a spark thing that is not, you can't verbalize why you would lose that spark. But I think that he saw that tip of the iceberg and he's like, yeah, that's unappealing to me. I don't want to have someone that looks at me as a bad husband or a bad man, or has a family that would look at me as a failure as a man. If my wife said, I'm going to pay for breakfast, is that okay? And I said, okay, that's fine. I don't understand. In my world, that's not an indictment on my personality or my manhood. Now, and I don't even know if that's what Maria would say. Maybe they'll get into it. I'm sure it's more nuanced than that, but that's the way it kind of came across anyway. So that's reasonable. And then it's also reasonable to keep it on the inside, or just tell your friends off camera that you would worry that if you did get married, you would have some of those conflicts, or you'd have to change how you feel about gender or something, or you would have to hide things from your in-laws, or when you start having kids, you would start to conflict about how you're going to raise those kids. I mean, it's interesting that from the looks of it, just based on very little information, he has issues of, that he would present issues to his kids regarding classist notions, and she would have issues of parenting that had to do with rigid, traditional, pigeonholing gender roles. You know what I mean? I'm saying that based on very little information.
So is there anything you'd like to say?
I feel like they were incredible in terms of allowing me to learn about myself. And so I guess thank you. And then also, like I say, I wish that at times I'd treated their daughter a bit better.
We must address that there was an...
Okay. So he didn't elaborate, but he feels bad for insulting her and her family. And he was starting to cry a little bit.
Another connection that was formed in the pods.
Yes, let's take a look.
Hello, you okay?
I'm good. So here.
Yeah, so I guess we'll see how this goes. I'm going to take a guess and say that they are dating and that they're doing okay together.
I've never felt it before. Like, the room felt still, like I was completely in love with him. But having watched the series back and seeing his connection form with Maria, I totally get it. It's been quite good to have that clarity and that closure for myself to be able to...
That's interesting. Yeah. I don't know if we've heard that before, that for her, during the pods after she got dumped by Tom, It was confusing to her. It felt very real, and it was the love. And she might have been confused because she felt like it was mutual, and it was mutual enough for Tom. But then to watch it and see how Tom was connecting with Maria in the pods, she's like, oh, it wasn't just a random thing that happened, or he didn't dislike me. It was more that he just really connected with Maria. So it's not, it doesn't reflect on me in terms of my worth or my attractiveness or my rate in terms of how I choose people to fall in love with. It's just, look at the two of them. They really, really connected. I wonder if for her also, she's watching and she's thinking, well, maybe he's not really the one for me. I don't know. So it sounds like they're not dating.
To do was because I knew that my priority had to be my fiance. Obviously, Tash and I had a really, really strong bond, and I just wanted to make sure that firstly we were cool, and obviously I knew that we were going to be seeing each other today, and we've exchanged a few messages. And Tash, as always, has been incredible and very empathetic about everything.
Okay, so they haven't dated. He reached out a week ago, I think. Well, he says in preparation for the reunion, but I also wonder if just watching the show prompted them to do that as well. And good on Natasha for being mature and differentiated enough to not get up in arms. I mean, I'm guessing it was complicated to watch, right? To watch the person you fell in love with fall in love with someone else and choose them and not you. I mean, maybe Natasha had a variety of feelings. I'm guessing that's true. But for Natasha to be able to say that, because, just imagine the impulse would be to say, oh, yeah, for Natasha, watching it back, I can tell that I dodged a bullet or something. I don't know. And try to save face. So, she's exhibiting a lot of differentiation, maturity.
I think, I had a certain view of that, and Maria's view was different, and it's okay that those views are different.
Yeah, and I just want to say about the whole splitting bills thing, because I feel like it was completely taken out of context. Never once did I expect you to pay my bills, finance my life, buy me luxury. I just want to set that straight. I never once said that, thought that, or wanted that in my life.
How do you feel about it?
Okay, yeah, I don't think, well, I guess we didn't know, but I didn't assume that. Although there was that one line where she was saying she didn't want to pay his mortgage, but they would be married. So there was that, but that was pretty brief, and it seemed edited in, it seemed like they had excised any kind of broader conversation, so who knows. But I would have wished her to expand. It's fine if she has a traditional gender. That's the thing it's about freedom. People will say traditional gender roles are inherently exploitative and sexist. And traditionally they were, but that's because there was no choice. There was no freedom. If people choose and they have the ability to say, I don't want to do this in that way, or I don't want to do it anymore, let's have a conversation, and there's mutual respect and understanding and flexibility, then it's fine. A heterosexual couple could say that the husband will always open the door and will pay for everything, as long as it's agreed upon and discussed, and the individuals don't come to that decision having been brainwashed by a previous family system or a culture or something, because people will say, I want this, and they believe they want it, but that's just because they don't know of any other option, or they've been programmed to believe that that's all that women are worth or something like that. So as long as people come to it with not that indoctrination, and it's complicated, of course, but because how do you know? So there's no scientific measurement for whether or not someone's been brainwashed before, but it's a conversation. Anyway, so it's fine if that's the way that she wanted to do things, where she never paid for any, in terms of like dinners and breakfasts or something, right? But I'm curious as to what she would say to elaborate on that. He seemed to be, I don't know if I included this in the bit, but he seemed to be saying that he has learned from her and from watching the footage that he didn't say classism. He's not even, no one's identifying they're using the word judgmental. So I guess that is at baseline the only thing you can really say for sure about her job, right? So he was very wise and differentiated and mature to say in the moment, it's one thing to be aware of something, it's another thing to actually change it, he's saying. I think that's that's literally what he's saying, but then the next thing he said seemed to not be in line with that. But anyway, yeah, absolutely. Awareness is half the battle. Awareness is the beginning, but it's half the battle. So I think is, and I'll talk about for myself. I'm a product of American culture, mainstream American culture, and as a kid in the mid 80s, never had a conversation or had any kind of meaningful thought exercise or exploration or discussion around classism. I probably didn't even know the word classism existed in 1986. But what happened was I was being driven to work by a friend of my parents, and on the way, I pointed to my football coach, actually, who worked at the Dairy Gold plant downtown Issaquah Dairy Company. And I pointed and I said, oh, my coach actually works there. And I said something derogatory about how labor jobs are substandard or bad jobs or something. I was looking down on him. And the woman that was driving me to school took note of it, and she's a teacher at the school, and she also would bring her kids to my mom's daycare. That's how they knew each other. Anyway, at some point, she tells my mom what I had said. I don't know the tone of it at all. My mom talks with my dad, and my dad and mom come to me like later that day or something. At some point, it's pretty quick after, and they sit me down and they firmly explain to me what I did wrong and that I should never do it again. And it worked. I mean, something about the way that they were communicating about it. Maybe I was old enough to hear it or something. And maybe I had already absorbed a lot of counter-classist notions to know better. It wasn't mind-blowing. When they were telling me, I was like, yeah, I pretty quickly, I was like, yeah, that's awful. Why did I say that? And ever since then, I'm sure I've committed I'm positive I've committed classist microaggressions or have thought in certain ways. For sure, we can't get out of it, but we can do everything we can to change it. So along the lines of what Tom just said, it's one thing to know it. It's another thing to change it. It's a constant battle, because even if we manage somehow through magic to purge all of the indoctrination out of us, the classist notions are coming at us all the time and subtly indoctrinating us counter to our efforts to push back on it. So it's hard. And so I think that's what he was referring to, but there was no discussion of the word classist. I want to mention something that they included earlier. They were asking Natasha about this scene, this clip at the party where Natasha was saying love, and the host was saying, so Natasha, were you saying past tense you loved him, or that you loved him right then and there? Which maybe, and then Natasha said, no, it was past tense. I wasn't saying I love you, please be with me. Well, one, the way it looked is that she was still kind of hoping for them to be together, which would be, and two, that would be totally normal. She fell in love with him. And at that moment, Tom, from my memory, was verbalizing that he was having a little bit of trouble with Maria. And so there's nothing wrong with Natasha saying like, well, if things don't work out, hit me up. But then I was wondering, did the audience, a portion of the audience, start attacking Natasha for trying to move in on someone else's man or something like that? And, certainly I suppose that's a conversation, but and certainly that will happen sometimes. But in situations like this, for people like Natasha, they fell deeply in love. And then a week later, maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, they get to see the person for the first time. She hadn't even seen him, right? She gets to see him for the first time, and, it's just overwhelming, right? So there's nothing strange about having certain desires or throwing stuff out there. Now, if Natasha lied or, threw Maria under the bus or something, then that's something else. But, like when Jessica season 6 was saying, well, and Jimmy sees me, you're going to knock your socks off, or what did she say? Anyway, what am I saying? I'm rambling.
Is there anything positive? Is there anything about the relationship in a positive way that you miss?
Yeah, we had good times.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with having broken up and having your heart broken because he was the one. I mean, so at the altar, he said no. She hadn't gone yet, but it looked like she was going to say yes and was hoping he would say yes, thought he might say yes. So there's nothing wrong with her having a very negative view of him. We are at our most irrational having been dumped. Not to say that it's irrational for her to not like him, but you know what I'm saying. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.